welcome to the Southampton Village work session, January 15th, 2021.
June. It's June.
Or June. June 15th, 2021. So we have a couple of pending decisions. I think we're ready for you to write a decision, Jeffrey, on both John Street and 950 Meadow Lane. And I believe 86 West Prospect, but I'm recused from that. But I believe that there'll be enough votes to vote in favor of both John Street and Meadow Lane.
And I will have those for the board to review over the weekend in advance of Tuesday, so that the board can look them through.
And Mr. Chairman, 950 Meadow Lane is a wetlands decision. That was that one that was a minor change and an improvement. So I'll have an accompanying wetland special permit decision.
Okay, and you can have that by next Tuesday?
Absolutely, yes.
And we're going to do West Prospect Street also, right?
Yes.
We discussed, I don't think that's come to a resolution in any way. Wasn't there, they were going to bring in,
Sure it has.
how?
They moved the thing 5 feet further north to satisfy the neighbor to the south.
Well, maybe that doesn't satisfy me. I have to look at it. I'm not willing to say either way.
Minor application, nothing to it.
That's your advice. I hear it, but I have different thoughts sometimes.
Okay, so we'll hold off on decisions for that. And now we do have Town of Southampton 51 Pond Lane to discuss at this work session.
What happened to the shears? Did we do that?
303 First Neck.
303 First Neck.
Oh, my apology. I skipped right past it. So case number 3101, 303 First Neck, if we can start with that as a topic of discussion. Does anybody have any questions or comments about case number 3101?
Well, how was it actually left? They're saying that it's
Upstairs, it's
a
fine.
beach, you know, that the first floor is fine, that it has the use as some kind of a pool house, and now everything's above on the second floor. But they
I
still,
understand, Ms. Susan, I don't mean to interrupt you. I understand we're awaiting a written report from the building department. Is that correct, Jeffrey?
That is correct. I spoke with Mr. Talbot, who was going to review the file, and I'm just waiting for an updated response from him. Without going into legal issues, he was going to review the amended proposal that had been submitted. He hadn't reviewed that after the amendment, so he will be providing a report to the board on his thoughts.
Susan, did you have any other comments or questions, or are you satisfied to await the report from the building inspector?
yeah, one step at a time. Right, good.
Julia, do you have any questions or concerns about 303 First Neck?
Not at this time.
And Kevin?
No, I had no questions about it.
Okay, so I think we're going to just await the written report, and then we can continue our discussion based upon the written report that the building inspector provides. And we can move on to Town of Southampton, 51 Pond Lane.
I'm going to tune out on this one, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be back afterwards.
Do we have our replacement consultant?
Mr. Chairman, I had emailed Mr. Cleary earlier, and the note that came back indicated that he was away. So I don't know if there was some miscommunication.
Okay, well, let's see what we can accomplish without Mr. Cleary. Are there any board questions or concerns at this stage about 51 Pond Lane?
Well, there's a concern about the parking, but you know, this village holds those concerts in the park all summer, and there's no problem there with parking. I don't think there's any This place is not going to attract a large crowd. It's going to attract groups of people, small groups of people walking through the museum. And if they have any events, it's not going to attract a large crowd either. So I'm okay with the park.
Yeah, Jeffrey, what is our standard for review according to the Southampton Village Zoning Code with respect to a variance from the parking requirements? Is it a balancing, or is there a different standard of review?
It would be the same. It would be the same in terms of it being an area request for a variance.
Well, the way I see it with their traffic consultant, and a residence wasn't considered under the master plan to have anything to do with shared parking. This situation requires a change from residential to a different use, to a special exception, I don't know what it's called. And then I feel that wasn't accounted for in the master plan. And therefore the 53 parking spaces, or whatever many there are definitely an issue for the retail and for the people who are trying to shop and eat and use our village, that was never accounted for. These are extra, these are more. And that to me is a substantial difference from if a business with on, let's say, Job's Lane needed extra parking spaces, and then the shared parking consideration would come into play. But that really is, to me, very different.
This is not a business. And look, this Mary is a hero to many people in this community, many people in this community. We're not going to turn this down. No way, this is going through.
Well, I would like, Kevin, for us to apply the village code standards. So I did want to clarify, Jeffrey, with you. Is it the 5-point test for parking, whether an undesirable change will be produced in the character of the neighborhood, whether the benefits sought by the applicant can be achieved by some other method, whether the requested area variance is substantial, whether the proposed variance will have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood, and whether the alleged difficulty was self-created. Is that our 5-point test?
It is.
Okay, so I mean, just as a deliberative board, I would like to consider all of the area variances, you know, in light of the standards that we're mandated to apply.
I agree. In addition, I had asked, I feel like we're missing some documentation that would clarify some of the permissions of the ownership, the use of the property, the chartering of the museum, many things. Because I find some of the information contradictory and some of it lacking. I feel we need to have the complete application or explanation of the chartering of this museum. What I think we received was a charter that started in 2008, before the Pierce Concert House was even discussed, which was for the African American Museum. And somehow that is becoming conflated with this area. I'd also like to know very specifically and by whom the property is owned, what it is called. I believe it's called the Pierce Concert Homestead in the deed, or the agreement between the town and the village. I'd like that explained in detail so that we know what's going on. And I know that the ARB landmarked this homestead, and there are different stipulations and different usage patterns for a historic homestead. So I would like someone to explain all of that to us in writing.
We can't hear you, Antoinette.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, so I do have a Dr. Georgette Gear-Key in the audience who is saying that there's an IMA submitted and that the application is complete and in writing. I'm happy to let her in if you guys tell me to. You need to let me.
We can bring it up at the public meeting. Right now, I think this is our opportunity to have a conversation among ourselves and collect our thoughts.
And
Yeah, I
because
can't hear you.
I just wanted you to know that I'm getting the messages.
Okay.
No, thank you. And Jeffrey, I think you had at one point started to research what standards a municipality needs to meet, that it's different if it's the village or the town applying for variances. Could you?
Sure, and to some extent, I would want to discuss this with the board as attorney-client. So I won't get too specific, but generally, if there's a municipality that owns property within another municipality, the question that comes up is, does that municipality, in this case, it would be the town, do they need to fully cooperate with the zoning code of the municipality that they own the property in, which in this case would be the village? And there are cases that indicate that there is a different balancing test from the one that the board normally uses to determine the extent to which that municipality would need to comply with the zoning of the municipality within which the property is found. But essentially, it comes down to a question of whether or not the property would be, the purpose was for a public interest. Is a public interest being served, and would there be any detriment to the surrounding area? It's very similar to the normal criteria that are used. But what I will do, as I said, because this is a legal issue, I'll direct all the board members the standards that you may apply offline. The second question was, would the village be bound by its own zoning code? And my research currently indicates that for the purposes of this, I think that the village would be. And those are the two things that I was looking at, Mr. Chairman.
Julia, do you have any questions about this application that you want to be addressed?
I asked an awful lot of questions at the public hearing last month, and I feel as though some of them have been satisfied, but I actually am interested in our next public hearing before I make additional comment. I am concerned about these parking spaces, and I think that the questions that came up last month about the parking study that was presented to us, and I'm sorry that Chick isn't here representing, I would have wanted to hear what he had to say about that parking study. It seemed too dated to be able to be a reliable resource for us. And the question Susan brings up about a homestead versus a museum, because I think the building itself and the landmarking that has happened is absolutely the right thing to have done. But I am concerned about the ancillary. I'm concerned about what's going to happen in terms of traffic, separate from obviously Kevin's concerns that he's expressed, that he doesn't have. The village is, I couldn't find parking over the weekend, and all I thought of was, how are we going to accommodate all these additional parking spots? So it's very much stayed in my mind. So that's my only comment tonight.
Okay, so do we want to just hold off if there are no other questions at this point, wait for the next public hearing? Would that work for you, Susan and Julia and Kevin?
Yep.
It works for me because also the neighbors hired an attorney and we haven't heard that person, and I don't know who else we haven't heard. We were just given, the applicant provided us with some information and their attorney, but I thought it raised almost more questions than it answered for me. But I want to hear what, I really, I don't feel that I have a clear idea about the actual naming, not the naming, the actual, what is actually, what has happened in the past? What is actually allowed now? I believe they have a building permit to build back the house. And they have a permit to keep the accessory building. They already have that. And the place has been landmarked. So the question is, what else do they have permission to do? And I'm not sure what that is.
Jeffrey, do you want to weigh in on that? I mean, I do believe they have the option now to rebuild the house and the cottage, and that prior zoning board decisions granted those variances. So if they wanted right now, those structures could be rebuilt. Is that your understanding?
My understanding is consistent with that. I don't think that, in terms of the whole picture, though, I do think that based upon the IMA and the application that's before the board, what they're asking for is, if maybe the right word isn't to expand that, but they're asking to be able to use the entire property in a way that I think the board is continuing to determine at its hearings, whether or not this will be a museum under the code for special exception purposes. And I believe that they submitted additional documentation with respect to that, that the board can continue to consider. I can certainly follow up, Ms. Stevenson, in terms of the items that you mentioned earlier, whether that's with other counsel or with the ARB, to obtain some of the documents that you were mentioning, if you think that would be helpful to the board.
Yeah.
That's something I can do.
Because they gave a one-page agreement that they said now is still valid. But it
I-
doesn't actually even say what property they are addressing. And I believe that that is about the African American Museum that's going to open on June 19th. I'm not sure that extends to this property. That's what I don't understand. These women, they're representing that, but I don't actually see any documentation of that. And to me, that's a crucial problem. And and I also feel, because I was the chair of the ARB, I know that there are special considerations for a landmark property that have to do with what you can put on the property and things like that. And I would have hoped, because I read the ARB decision, which mentions, it calls it the Purist Concert Homestead in the written decision. And I would like to know, what are the parameters of use or of having to do with what could be done on the property as a result of its landmarking as a homestead, like the Halsey House. That's what I think. I don't know exactly, but I really feel the designation of the buildings and the nomenclature is important. And I think the applicant may be saying certain things, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's true. That's all. And I don't want to be working under false pretenses. What is this? If I'm told that the building already has a building permit and that and they've also been given variances to move it to where it originally was, which I think is great, then I'm wondering, what else is there? I also have questions about calling the actual house a museum. The house is a homestead. That's what it's designated as. So I have questions about all this nomenclature and what actually that means legally. That's all, Jeff.
Okay, so I'll be happy to look into obtaining those documents for you. I do just want to make sure that the board members received the letter of June 10th. Did all receive that from the applicant?
What's the content of the letter, Jeffrey?
It was addressed to the chair and they mentioned, it begins with on May 27th, the applicant presented the application at a public hearing. And the ZBA had several questions that related to the parking site plan layout.
Yes.
And I just wanted to make sure that everybody had that. And I'll obtain additional documentation beyond that. But I did want to make sure that the board had received that.
Okay, should we move on to Sanford Place?
Sure.
Are we ready to move? Okay, so let's move on to 99 Sanford Place. And do we want to invite Chick back?
Sure.
I am here. This
Is
is not a
anybody-
matter that involves wetlands, but there are a couple of new cases that I have looked at for a briefing on the board. But I'm back. Thank you.
So 99 Sanford Place is, as part of a subdivision, the applicant wants to obtain a special exception use to convert from office use to residential use. Are there any questions or thoughts about that? I have some of my own, but I'll
Improvement. That's an improvement. Upzoning in effect. Going from office use to residential use, which is a higher degree of use. And we've done this many times before.
Julie or Susan, do you have any questions, or should I?
Well, Mark, I used to think that it was better to have residential than commercial, but I hear what you're saying, that we shouldn't just get rid of all, just out of hand, think that that's always okay. And so I'm willing to listen to what a consultant or someone who knows more about this than I do has to say. I have gone back there and looked at the situation, and I feel like it would fit either way in terms of how it looks, but we don't do how it looks. So leave that out.
You're back then, you have to see how it looks. It's all residents back there.
Well, here's the concern. So the applicant cites the Southampton Village Comprehensive Plan from, I don't know how many years ago it was, but many years ago. And the comprehensive plan says that there should be an analysis of the OD zone. Okay, we've never had an analysis of the OD zone. Okay, so, and the other thing the applicant proposes here is that because the board granted a use variance in connection with 78 White Street, that the precedent there is a reason for us to grant the special use variance in this case as well. And that in fact, we're to some extent, according to the applicant, compelled to grant a use variance here because we did so at 78 White Street. So what starts to concern me, and why I would like to bring Chick as our consultant into this, is we're step by step, if we follow the logic of the applicant, we are step by step eliminating the office district. And I don't know that that's a good thing. I don't know that it's a bad thing, but I'm not going to be part of doing something when we don't know exactly what the effect of our decision might be. So if we grant a use variance, a use exception in this case, then the neighbor in this case will come in and say the same thing. I think I'm more valuable as a residential use. I'm doing it because I think my property is more valuable as residential. And you just gave it to my neighbor. So, and one after another, we have eliminated the office district. So I looked at the office district. It was carefully delineated years ago. There were reasons why an office district was created. We're a village, you know, distinct from hamlets like Watermill or Bridgehampton that may or may not have office districts, may or may not have the complexity of our planning process. But before we do anything here, I would like advice from a professional planner. You know, what are we doing and why are we doing it? And I think in this case, what I would request is that, Chick, if you're available and your company is available, that we request from Nelson Pope a study of the office district. The study that was, you know, perhaps referenced in the master plan, but never completed over so many years. I think it's important for us as a board, before we take any action here, to go back and understand and respect our history and why an office district was created in the first place and why it was delineated here. And if we are going to continue or start down a path of allowing use exceptions to convert office to residential, what does that do to our village? You know, what happens if in 10 years we no longer have an office district, but instead all along North Sea Road are homes instead of offices? What happens if that all becomes residential? As this applicant would like to become residential, even though it was used previously as office. What happens if you're driving down North Sea Road in 10 years and all you're doing is passing homes? And some of those homes, again, will be the result of subdivisions, because a lot of these properties are large properties, just like this, you know, was over an acre and requested a subdivision. I would like the study, Chick, to include what would be the zoning here. So if somebody else with an office right now has more than an acre, will they be allowed to subdivide into 2 half acres as this applicant did, or perhaps 3 lots? So what's the plan, I guess, is my question. And we haven't had that completed. We need a planner. Okay, we can't do things without understanding what the long-term effect will be on the village. So I also understand that the application itself cites a code provision which provides that the applicant shall bear the cost to the approving authority of professional review when such expertise is required by the approving authority. I would propose here that the expertise of Nelson Pope is required by the approving authority, in this case, the zoning board, and that the cost of this professional review, the cost of your review and your report, Chick, will be borne entirely by the applicant if they want to proceed with this application.
I have a question. What's the zoning on Nugent Street where those 3 empty banks are? Is that zoned office district? Is it? Does anyone know what?
That's part of the problem, Kevin. I don't know. Okay, I don't have a planning study.
It defeats your argument. That's zoned office.
I don't have an argument other than we need more information.
I mean, they can't do anything with those banks. There's zoned office district. Maybe you get small offices in there, but you get large buildings. Who needs a large bank if they're an office selling real estate, or is this doing legal work. You know, I'd like to know what that is zoned. I'm talking about Newton Street on the north side, not the restaurant. On the bank side, where the empty banks sit looking at us every day, starkly empty.
So, Mr. Chairman, you and I did have a discussion about cases where additional expertise may be appropriate. And I'm familiar with that section of the code and have discussed it with the village attorney. So I would assume that that can be worked out. If the board would like us to proceed with such a study, we can do that. I would certainly look to, make it, limit the scope to what's needed for the decision, but also not ignore, the precedent, because that's really what you're talking about here. Our firm did do a North Sea Road study for the village a number of years ago. So we do have some background already in some of those areas where the office district transitions to village district. So I am familiar with that, and we can certainly start with the information that we have already. And I have good notes from what you're requesting tonight. So if the board is inclined to have us do that, we're certainly happy to assist in that manner. And as I said, I have good notes on exactly what you're looking for. I will also say that I don't have the application at this time, so I can, if Antoinette could maybe request, or I'll just email Jackie to send me the information so that I have the background and can get familiar with it.
Jeffrey, is there anything else we would need to do at this juncture?
No, and just so that the record's clear, I think the section that's being referred to, it's noted in the application, but it's also in the code, is 116-19.6 subparagraph B, like Bob. And if it's the board's determination, I would just ask, is there then a resolution to consult with Mr. Voorhees' firm for the purposes of conducting the evaluation described? What perhaps might make sense is if Mr. Voorhees would be so kind as to submit a scope of work to the board for the board to consider, and then the board can decide if they wish to proceed with it.
That sounds like the way to go. I don't know how do you contact the applicant and tell them? I have no idea how this works.
I think the scope of work will be submitted so that the board can determine a potential cost, and then we would notify the applicant so that there's full transparency and advice.
Okay, no, yeah, because we don't want to. I know that the North Sea overlay, which Chick was referring to, is that on the website? Or maybe I can't tell if I was working, had to do with my job, or if it was a big public thing. The North Sea overlay district, which goes all the way up to Schmitz, I believe, and beyond, which would go past Sanford Place. Is that correct? Did it?
Correct. Yes.
Did it include Sanford Place?
My recollection, Susan, is it just addressed parcels that fronted on North Sea Road?
Right. You're right. So it skipped. Okay. So you have a lot. Okay.
We have a lot of information.
Yeah.
Yes.
And nothing ever came out of that, right?
I know recommendations were made, and I honestly don't know the outcome, but I don't think any major changes were made.
Okay.
Is that Chick? I think in the just so we can continue our conversation about what the proposal would include. But one of the things that engendered this plan was when we asked the applicant what zoning would apply, if we were to grant a special use exception, and we hadn't really thought about that. I'm not sure the applicant had either, but I think that's part of our, I guess, planning process. And, this may be, second nature to you, but if it does start to become residential from office, what are the lot size requirements? What are the dimensional requirements for each of these lots? Where are we going with this? And
Right.
what might it look like based upon a planner's vision? If this is the pathway that we take.
Very good. I will include that.
So, okay, are we ready to move on to 85 Hildreth Street?
Sure.
There you go.
I don't know if we have, it's been renoticed so that it includes the rear yard setback that was missing. But I don't think we have any additional documentation. I don't think we have the elevations for the porch. So I don't know that there's much more for us to discuss here. I know we've discussed this at length. And we're awaiting the applicant's delivery of additional documents.
There was a letter from the neighbor, John Bennett, and his wife saying that they don't object, although I think they may have objected. He had made some comments in the past. I personally feel this is like, if we give, these are really tight little places, and I feel like they do have a garage. This is my thing about the zoning situation. They have a garage. They just don't use it in the same way. And now they're asking us to give them leeway to make it, to get more space so they can have cedar closets or whatever is in there in a washing machine and a garage. And I feel like maybe then that would just set off everyone in these small lots is going to want to do that. And I honestly think it's not so great for the neighborhood. It goes way back, right by the back of his property, which is, the property isn't very big. So I need to think about it, and I'd like to see the pictures, but there's a part of me that feels like in dealing with zoning issues, and yes, they already have a garage. They're just not using it because they've done something else. And to me, I feel like that's something you choose. And it's sort of a self-imposed situation. They could put their car in the garage if they wanted to change it. And I feel like if every single person in these streets wants to do this, that's not a good thing for the village.
I have, Julia, your hand is up. I don't know if that was on
I
purpose.
don't know how to bring it down.
Oh, well, I'll see if I can do it. If not, don't worry.
You're
but
already here.
I do have Andy Spretzer's hand up, so you let me know if you want me to admit or if you want to wait to the public hearing.
Why don't we wait for the public hearing?
Okay, no
If we
problem.
could. Thanks. And then are we ready to move on to 75 Hetty Creek for new cases?
I don't like to talk about new cases until the applicant has given his case.
Well, do you want to maybe,
Just go over
are you
what it
missing any
is?
documents, or do you have any questions that the
Oh,
applicant
okay.
might?
I always want them to. There's a part of me that thinks that they've already asked for some of this before. But maybe it was in the ARB, but I recognize some of this. And I don't think it's in their application, so if they're missing some documents about previous board decisions, we would like to see them if you're listening.
And Jeffrey, I mean, just reading the notice, it doesn't look like it's presented correctly. It's presented as a wetlands permit, but then the first request for relief is setback relief.
Peter. Yes, Mr. Chairman, I was looking at that earlier. I do think that somebody reading the notice would reasonably be apprised of the applicant's request, although I understand what you're saying. The heading seems to be a bit off because it seems to have the variance request and the wetlands request under the heading of wetlands. However, it then goes on, if we look at under the notice where it says paragraph 1, it suggests that what they're seeking is the dimensional variance. But I do recognize there's a bit of lack of clarity there. But as I said, I do think it would sufficiently apprise somebody reading the notice of what's being requested.
Another ice cube.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, so you think the notice is not deficient? It's,
I do not think it's deficient. I think it would sufficiently let somebody know who's reading it what is being requested. Although I recognize I had the same question when I looked at it myself.
So there is a front yard variance request, and it is 47.5 feet where 60 is required.
Yes.
And so we can await the applicant's presentation on that. And I think we can await the applicant's presentation on 14 Gin Lane.
Right.
We're going to have a problem with 14 Gin Lane.
Yes, we need to ask counsel about, but can we do that privately?
Of course,
Okay.
of course. So we can move on to 339 Captain's Neck Lane. And I did, because I saw that I reviewed the file, I did ask the building department, and I would like the applicant to include in their file their application for a building permit and the building permit that they did receive, you know, and any ancillary documents, because it appears that the pool house is already built. But when I reviewed the file, I didn't see the original application for the building permit. So
Pool house,
that would be.
drive by that, you can't even see it unless you really look through the trees.
Mhm.
It's on a corner, but you can't even see the pool house over it.
Mhm.
And it's been in existence for a long time, evidently.
We approved something else for this property a year and a half ago. This is the second time this property has come before us in the last 18 months.
So we would like to know that there are any prior decisions. That's part of the application, isn't it, Jeffrey?
Yeah.
It is.
So why aren't we receiving the prior decisions in the folder if it's
What
stated?
was the prior decision?
This property came before us about 18 months ago, and they asked, I can't remember if it was for this building or a garage, it was for something. And we granted them the permission that they sought. And now it's back in front of us again. That's what he's asking for. I can't tell you what it was, if it was the garage or a pool house but it was something.
Okay, so we hope that the applicant by next Tuesday, you know, will provide the
Thursday.
yeah, but the Tuesday's
we need
the
it Tuesday.
delivery date for the documents. By next Tuesday, the original application for the building department, any prior decisions with respect to the property, and that should help.
Excuse me, Chair, just so you know, I have Phil Piro in the audience and he does have his hand up. Again, I did hear you say that you're waiting for the public hearing, but I just.
No, but sure, no, if he wants to, you know, just, I'm glad he's listening, but if he wants to speak, sure.
Okay, I'll let him in. Hold on one second. Okay, and Mr. Piro, when you come in, if you can just unmute yourself and turn on your camera, that would be great. Yeah, I don't.
Oh, fine. Thank you for inviting me in and allowing me to speak. I will happily comply with all the additional requests for materials. But Julie, I've never been before the zoning and planning board before. This was not my application for a garage. I was 2 years ago before the architecture review board for the pool house and did not request any variances of setbacks or front yard setbacks at that time. And for the record, this was an inadvertent mistake by my subcontractor, and it was an honest mistake. I have spoke to at least one neighbor on the side who affects the setback. He has no problem with it. I can speak to my neighbor across the street. And if the committee would welcome a letter from these people, I'm happy to obtain it as well. I did give Jackie a sign off on all the inspections that Chris and Ten performed, and I thought that would be sufficient. But I can provide a copy of the original building permit. And again, I apologize. I'm embarrassed that I have to ask for this. It would be a very costly situation to try to correct. You'd have to take the one side down and one side off. And it's my personal opinion. I'm happy to obviously hear what you got to say. I think it doesn't have any adverse impact on the neighbors or the aesthetics or anybody else's property value. So I appreciate any kindness you can extend to me and my family.
No, absolutely. And I think some of our mission is to find out why it happens. And that's the reason for the additional documentation. It's probably, fine in your case, but if it started to happen throughout the village and we didn't know why, it would be a problem. What revealed this now? Because how long ago was the pool house built?
The pool house the last inspection was last October, and so we were approximately 18 months into the permitting process, and Squires and Holden came in and did an as-built and checked that. It turns out that the real issue was the southwest corner of the pool house. There's only one little corner of that pool house that slipped into 18 inches, which then pushed it into the front yard by because it's what would you say? It's the property's on an angle, even though the house is situated in the pool, it's situated square. The property line is at an angle, and the subcontractor, which was Social Concrete, assured me that we were well within the setbacks of 35 feet, and that obviously was not the case. And they measured from that hedge line, which is definitely a property line, but they made a mistake, and but it was my mistake. I was the GC. I accept full responsibility for this. So again, I apologize to the village, the town, and I apologize to my neighbors who have all been noticed as well. So I'm happy. So I will happy to provide the original building permit. But again, Julie, I never came before the zoning for this. Never asked for it. In fact, this is
my apology, because I
Yeah,
must have been
no
at the
problem. I
ARB
mean,
meeting.
No, it's confusing, and it seems like there's always a lot of activity on Captain's Neck Lane these days. So I'm happy to have that for the next meeting. And would you like a letter from several of my neighbors in support of the application?
It's helpful, yes.
Okay, I'm happy to get that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So we can move on to North Main, 54 North Main Street. Does anybody have any questions or?
Yes, I have a comment on this one. 54 North Main Street is the Coral Office Building. Where are the two lots that you want to subdivide? In back?
It looks like they're
There's a
divided.
flagpole.
Did you look at it? It's a Coral Office Building.
Yeah.
Where's the flagpole?
It's also, they're asking for a much smaller driveway than is required by law.
Where is this flagpole?
So on the south side, when they divide off the rear portion of the Coral offices, they'll need access. So they're creating a flagpole along the south side, but because of where the building is, it looks like the flagpole can't be wide enough.
Well, do they own that whole building?
Probably. They own the building
Yeah.
next door too. The house that's being renovated. But, it just seems like a lot of asking. It's what people are complaining about when they say that the village is overbuilt. I feel like, if it doesn't fit into the zoning, then it doesn't fit into the zoning.
So these lots are behind the office building?
Yes, one lot. They would be creating one lot behind the office building.
What are they gonna do with it? It's gonna be office, residential, or what?
That we can ask at the public hearing, but it's not in the paperwork so far what their plans might be or why they're doing this
Okay,
or what benefit accrues to them by doing this. We can ask that at the public hearing.
I had a hard time even trying to find this.
Jeff, one thing I did want to bring up at the meeting is the applications are still checking the box that says they have not been denied a building permit by the building department. And I think that's part of the reason why when we're receiving these applications, there's a lack of clarity as to what exactly we're reviewing and what zoning variance is being requested. I think it would be really helpful and much more efficient, and we could focus our attention and efforts, better if they do actually check the box off that they were denied a building permit and that the building department provides the reasons. So that will create at least a more focused area for us to consider, because right now we're it's a little bit unfocused.
I understand, Mr. Chairman. I've spoken to Mr. Talbot about that, and we'll follow up. My understanding is they will be using a form for just to meet that purpose, as a matter of fact.
Is there a timeline for that?
I will have to speak to Mr. Talbot. I will respond to the board just as soon as I can with a timeline.
Yeah, well, what I'm suggesting at this point, to Julia's point, let's not notice these applications until they're ready for us. And they're not ready for us until Chris has the time to prepare, the formal, denial. I mean, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's how it's done in other jurisdictions.
It is.
Yes.
Okay, it may take a little longer for an application, to reach, the attention of the zoning board, but that's the process. So instead, I think we're receiving some of these applications a little too early.
I will let Mr. Talbot know that that's the board's direction.
I mean, that's my feeling and my thought. But Julia, Susan, Kevin, let me know what you think. I just find ourselves, sometimes one step forward, two steps back.
I agree. I read through the thing and then I think, what didn't I find out? And now I have to escort. And honestly, I've decided that's not my job, although obviously it has become my job. But I don't actually think everything should be complete and we should know what's going on before we even we're being asked to respond to something and we don't have that to respond to, I guess is what I really think.
Mr. Chairman, perhaps I could suggest if the board's going to be speaking with council about another issue after the close of the meeting, perhaps we could address this issue as well with council.
Sure, that would be great. So we can stay on afterwards. Once we're off the camera, we can all talk a little bit longer.
Thank you.
Does that
And
work?
I have some familiarity with this issue as well, and we'll hopefully be able to participate at that time as well.
Thank you.
I'd like to say something while we're still on the camera.
Sure.
I picked up the press last Thursday. First page story. I couldn't believe it. My 36 years on this board, I don't recall anything like that ever happening. 3 members of this board would cross the line to coerce or encourage someone to file an application.
Kevin, why don't we do this? Why don't we go off public? That's not.
I'd like the public to hear this.
Well, I disagree with you. So why don't we go offline right now?
I believe the 3
Ed,
is
please.
fine.
Could we cut this and we'll talk about this after the meeting?
The mayor's mailbox by tomorrow.
Okay. This is political. It's not
Political.
public
Not political. You crossed the line. You went out and two others, and you encourage someone to file an application. We don't do that. We listen to applications. We don't encourage applications to come before us. I don't know where you got the idea that you could do that. I just don't understand. It floored me to read that article. I said, what are these three people thinking of? I mean, I could go out and encourage someone to file an application, but it's not my job. My job is to listen to applications that come before us, not encourage applications to come before us, because we don't like what's going on with the piece of paper.
Kevin, are you aware that the village code has a provision in it that provides for any village official to bring an appeal?
He can bring an appeal, and Joe could bring an appeal all he wants. But you don't go out and encourage Joe to bring an appeal. That's crossing the line. If he wants to,
Why do you think that the village code has that provision that provides any village official with the authority to make an appeal?
he can make an appeal. That's fine. I have no argument with that. It's what the three of you did. That's where
What did we do, Kevin? Did we force him to do that?
you crossed the line. You
What
encourage
line,
someone to
Kevin?
make an application.
Hmm?
You encourage someone to make an application.
Mhm.
That's wrong. Absolutely wrong. And I can never recall anybody in this board doing that before. And it's embarrassing to me. It's embarrassing to all the fine people I've served with in the past. Just embarrassing.
Well, I think you should get your facts straight, Kevin.
Is the story in the press straight? Did you encourage Joe to file an application?
No, I did
I think,
not. And I don't want to
Chairman,
discuss it on camera. 2 weeks
Chairman,
ago, you were
Mr.
complaining
Chairman.
we were called racist in the press.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, and if I may, and I realize I'm just the attorney for the board, what's being discussed now is not a matter that's before the board this evening. That matter is not pending. There is no application before the board to consider, and I would suggest that.
But he's withdrawing the application.
Yes,
Yeah.
Jeffrey, that's why I'm requesting Antoinette. Could you cut us off camera? Thank you.
And is the meeting then closed for the evening, except for the
I
discussion
move
with
that we
council
close the
about the two
meeting.
issues mentioned?
I move that we close the meeting.
Antoinette wants to speak.
I have to stop two places. One more second. You guys want to move that it's closed?
I
Very much.
move-
So moved.
Aye.
Nay.
Do I need another aye, Mr. Blank?
Aye.
Aye.